Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today we will be discussing The Perils of the Perfect Ashlar, an article by Worshipful Brother Robert E. Jackson.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Today on the Working Tools Podcast, we have all four of our usual cast of hosts. We have Worshipful Brother Stephen Chung from Prince Charles Lodge number 153 in Kelowna, British Columbia. Worshipful Brother Jarrod Dunham of Penticton Lodge 147 in Penticton, British Columbia. Very Worshipful Brother David Colbeth of King Solomon number 60 in Auburn, Washington. And I'm Very Worshipful Brother Matthew Appel from Mill Creek number 243, and we meet in Montlake Terrace, Washington. We are continuing our series here on where we're each sort of choosing an article and discussing it as a group. And it was my turn, so I chose an article from the Midnight Freemasons website called The Perils of the Perfect Ashlar. It was written by one of their contributors, Worshipful Brother Robert E. Jackson, who I should add I emailed back and forth with, and he said it was cool to use his article on the show and to link to it and stuff. So there will be links in the show notes. But it's a little different than the other articles that we'd sort of talked about. It was a little less Masonic and a little more lifey, if that makes sense. It seemed to be more things about life and some of the obstacles we encounter, and I sort of thought that was interesting as a little different flavor on what we've talked about. Steve, you looked like you were about to say something there. Sorry.
It was interesting. It was more about the fellow's journey himself and the things that he experienced in his journey to find himself the perfect Ashlar. It was a bit at the beginning of it. I stepped back a bit and reread it again, and it was like, poor guy's got some low self-esteem issues. Right, and that he's looking for that level of perfection in himself that is rare to find, right? And he was seemingly quite hard on himself, and then it was very interesting journey to hear his journey, because it takes you through a whole bunch of things that happen. His need to be better, for himself, his family, and his brothers. He says, or his wife, his kids, they deserve to better him, right? And that was his mindset. And it was like, well, at first I was thinking, well, okay, he's on a journey to enlightenment and whatnot, and maybe that's kind of where that was stemming from. But then it seemed he was criticizing himself for making mistakes along the way, but then he felt that those mistakes were what was supposed to make him or perfect him, I guess. That's kind of where it started for me. I mean, we'll go through it as it goes, but it was interesting that he made note of the law of attraction and whatnot. So he acknowledged these things, knowing how they work, obviously, yet he was still bringing it on to himself with those negative thoughts, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, he talks about the differences between self-loathing and having a pity party for yourself, and I'd like to think that I don't necessarily personally quite go as far as self-loathing, but man, I saw myself in a lot of the things that he talks about. You're taking on a lot of projects and then having trouble starting them because you have trouble seeing how they're going to be great in the end, and then and just the whole, like I said, several different aspects of this went, I can see me do it. I can see myself in that. And it was, like I said, it just sort of spoke to me. Do the rest of y'all have a thought on this, or is it just me wandering around in the wilderness here. Oh,
Here we go.
I saw Jarrod unmute, and I'm even. We have the
After you, my brother.
No, go for it. Go for it.
I was just going to say, there's nothing wrong with that needing to have your dishes in a certain place. Nothing at all wrong with that.
I've been known to rearrange the dishwasher. Yep.
I'm not just talking about the dishwasher.
The fact of the matter is, if you don't stack that dishwasher properly, it's going to prevent things from getting clean.
I'm not talking about the dishwasher. I'm talking about my freaking cupboards.
Oh, there too. It's important for fit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always love, I understand where the author is going, because when you are taught the lesson of the rough and the perfect Ashler, everyone, and I think, I always feel that people miss the point, at least what I have always thought of as the point with this, is that the perfect Ashler is the destination, but smoothing your rough Ashler is the journey that is supposed to be the important part. You're supposed to be taking those things about you that are rough and eliminating them. And it's not necessarily that you have to end up perfect. It's that you make the attempt to get there. So I understand how sometimes people take the lesson too far and figure that if they don't perfect themselves, they have failed, when just the act of improving yourself is really all that's expected of you.
I agree. Yeah, there's the was it if you're 1% better today than you were yesterday, by the that's improvement, and that is a good thing. One of the things that really spoke to me from this article was there's several things, like I said, but one of the things was he talks about the story of Michelangelo carving the angel out of the rough block of marble, and that the perfection was always in there, and it's just our job to try and get closer to it, to letting it out. And like I just said, I like to think that I try and be better every day than I was before, and try and reveal the good stuff that was in there. Maybe I need to go get some good stuff from somewhere else, though, and pad on to the Ashlar. I'm not sure how that would work, but
that was definitely a section I highlighted as well. But I also highlighted the section above it that said it's hard to imagine that ever becoming even close to something beautiful. Sometimes the Ashlar appears to be so rough that it's hard to imagine that beauty. And so I think sometimes we talked about the self-loathing and the whole piling on of opinions of ourselves. But yeah, inside of us is that, in theory, perfect Ashlar somewhere. And as Jarrod said, it's the striving, the attempt to. Lots of public speakers talk about that it's not the destination, it's the journey, it's the process that you go through. And so I would agree with all that.
I just met with a candidate for our lodge here. I had coffee with him for a couple hours yesterday, and we talked about his reason for joining, and it was a lot to do with self-improvement. He wanted to, work on himself and be the best version of himself, right? And I, having just read this, I had told him, not to be so hard on himself for and not to think himself imperfect, but rather to look at the journey. It's a lifelong journey of lessons that will appear when the time is right for them to appear, right? We all are not ready to receive every lesson that's put forth in front of us when it is actually put there, right? Maybe years later before we're actually prepared to learn these things, right? So being a bit of a perfectionist with one's self and identifying whether or not they are a good person or whatnot, they shouldn't be so hard on themselves in judgment.
And I was going to say too, I think it's important to have goals. He talks about the section, well, when I can X, or ... I'll be happy when this happens. And so it's not so much, while along that process, yeah, you need to have goals, you need to have things that you're trying to do, but it shouldn't necessarily be tied to your happiness. right? You should be able to hopefully be happy, and through that process of enlightenment, he talks a lot about his visitation to a lodge. He didn't really want to go one night, and he went anyway. And so by being around the other Masons, it helped lift him up and be happy. And so, and when my grandma passed away several years ago, I didn't feel good at all. I just wanted to go crawl in a hole. And I thought, no. And there was almost exactly the similar thing. It was a education program happening that night. And I thought, I need to go. I should go and be with my brothers. And I really didn't want to be anywhere else. And after that was over, I thought, yeah, that was right. This was where I needed to be, because I felt much better being around that. And so that is the part of enlightenment and being happy, was being around my brothers and being around that, because we're all there to help each other too. Right? That's the important part. It's not just about us. It's about helping each other. And then he talked about how he was able to kind of talk with his brothers about the struggles he was having, and they gave him some suggestions or whatever. And I think that's just as important as it's social, but it's not social. It's not, you still need to have that interaction, but it's not a social night, so to speak. You're not just imbibing and having fun, but it's still that interaction.
Yep. The interaction with other good men is. Let's fall in. I'm going to fall into all the sayings that people use, but it's the whatever iron sharpening iron thing. There are other good people out there, and you're with those good people, and you get better through the process. That might not have been the right quote, but it was the fact that you're with other people who are striving in the same direction, just striving to be better, striving to do well is a powerful thing for yourself. And having a support network of guys who are out there and are saying, yeah, David, let me, talk to me. What are you thinking? How are you feeling? And that's, man, is that an important thing.
Absolutely. We've talked in the past too about the idea of charity, what charity really means. And I was turned on to that. I'll say it by, we've had a speaker on, Zane McCune. He does a presentation he does on charity and what the word charity means. And of course the root word is agape. And I think we've talked about it before a few times. And so he ultimately comes down to what charity means, brotherly love in Freemasonry. It really translates to brotherly love. And so whenever I see the word or hear the word charity, automatically, just like you see for us, you see a trowel, you see a gavel, you see a square, whatever, we automatically kind of translate those into things. And so for me, the word agape translates to brotherly love. And so when he quoted that section in Corinthians on brotherly love, or on charity, excuse me. See, there I go. And so I just automatically put in brotherly love, suffereth long, is kind. Brotherly love envieth not. Brotherly love faunteth off itself. It's not puffed up. Does not behave unseemly. Seeketh not her own. Is not easily provoked. Thinketh no evil. And then I wrote, kind of like a puppy. When you go into a room and it's like, hey, Jarrod, hey, Steve, hey, man, it's great to see you. You can't not be excited when you come home and your dog is all going crazy and having a good, really great to see you. I remember the other morning, I don't know if they can hear me or not, but I bring my girls to school every morning, and sometimes they're pretty tired. I'm tired. We're all tired. Getting out of the car, they kind of get out of the car and they go into school. No big deal. One morning, she opened the door, and my daughter Grace, I heard somebody from the crowd yell, "Hey, Grace!" And I thought, oh, that's cool. It was neat to have somebody see who it was and be excited to see her. And I thought, and that's it relates back to this kind of stuff, is that brotherly love is like that. It doesn't matter how things have been before. It's in the now. He talks about that too. You can't change the past. The future is what it's going to be. It's the now. And so if we just constantly think about that when you see a brother walk through the door, hey, it's great to see you. Or if you haven't never met somebody, go up and meet him and talk to him and say hi, introduce yourself. Glad to see you're here.
Yeah, and I'll debate that statement of his a little later when we get down to that part there, where whatever happens will happen, because I believe if you know about the law of attraction and you believe in it, then you can affect the change, and you can affect what happens. It's not just a matter of what will be, will be. Right? And it's just the wrong mindset, right? There were several things before that part, though, that I thought were really worthy of talking to. Like every block of stone has a statue inside it, and it's the task of the sculptor to discover it. And that's kind of, if you relate that to a man's journey in Freemasonry, he is his own set of Ashlars, and it will evolve as he grows and learns the lessons that are available to him.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you wanted to direct the conversation matter, if we can jump around. When we're talking about Ashlars, of course, I immediately went to the physical thing as well, and not just to the idea of the Ashlar. And so I jumped over into Mackey's and wanted to learn more about the idea of the Ashlar, and it relates very similar to that, in that the Ashlar is not, he talks about the rough Ashlar and perfect Ashlar is not between one man and another, of generating snobbery and superiority, but it's, like Steve said, between what a man is at one stage of his own self-development and what he is going to be at another stage. So just to clarify, I guess maybe we should have talked about what the Ashlars actually are. Matt, do you want to talk about that? For people that don't know what Ashlars are.
Sure, I guess. So in most Masonic lodges, at least around these parts, there are two stones, literal stones in the lodge. One of which is more or less vaguely cube shaped, which has stuff sticking out of it. Like if you sort of rough took a stone and said, we could probably use this for a building. It's kind of like that. It's you couldn't just set another stone on top of it and start building. And then there's usually that's the rough Ashlar, and the perfect Ashlar is one that's in a lot of cases is buffed to a high shine and is ready to be used for a building. And I've always sort of wondered, because I actually have my lodge's old ones from before the merger are under my desk here, because someone was going to get rid of them. I couldn't bear that, so they're actually sitting under my desk here. I can kick them with my foot.
Nice.
But that's actually a really interesting perspective that you were talking about, David, from Mackey's, that the rough Ashlar and the perfect Ashlar are not two stones. They are one stone separated by time. And I never really thought of it that way. That's pretty cool.
Okay. I'm going to jump in here now. Because as soon as I picked up this article, it reminded me of another article that I read a while back. And I'm going to throw in a little bit of history here. Did you know that the perfect Ashlar wasn't originally one of the lodge furnishings? That some of the earliest catechisms actually don't discuss the rough and the perfect Ashlar. They talk the rough Ashlar, and I'm going to butcher this, I'm sure, and a broached thurnal, which is, if you can imagine what our perfect Ashlar, but instead of being flat on top, it's pyramidal. And that was actually the entered apprentices lesson to learn what they're supposed to make. And it's interesting that we no longer have that as part of our lodge furnishings.
Yeah, I was reading about that definition too, and I didn't quite understand at all. And it kind of alluded that it was York Rite, that York Rite expands upon that idea of the pyramid and the pyramidal cube. Also, I know because I just read it, but that it talks in York Rite, it talks more about a cube with the pyramid than it does the cubit, the oblong element of what we consider the Ashlars oblong for building, where they talk about the perfect Ashlar being a perfect square with a pyramid on top. I guess that's, again, I don't know really, but my understanding it's more the York Rite that has that idea, because they talk about that being in the triple tau The tau and the triple tau, those symbols are in there. And I've seen some of that stuff. I just don't know a whole lot about it. So sorry, York Rite guys.
But it's just interesting that on some of the early tracing boards that they have this broached thurnal, which is it makes sense because you quote Mackey, I quote Coyle. I just prefer a more modern book, modern being 1960s. But it's interesting because in it he talks. I got to read this because it's interesting that he says. I just hit my mic. It is an error to suppose, as some do, that the principal work of the Freemasons was the making of square or pristine stones to be laid in walls. The peculiar and characteristic work of the Gothic artists was the building of round and curved arches, columns, flying buttresses, ogies, no idea what that is, carving and even sculpturing. The making of Ashlars must have been left to apprentices. So it's interesting that, like, even if you go into the encyclopedias and stuff like that, that the rough, like, the perfect Ashlar isn't, it's a symbol that is not necessarily, although, as I've said earlier, it's to strive for, it's not necessarily the end goal. And I think that causes so many new Masons grief in that they figure that, I've got to improve myself. I've got to become perfect. And just the fact that you realize that you're not perfect means that you are a good person.
Exactly.
I've often wondered too, and this is kind of getting off topic, but the tools we are given as Masons to work. So they point out the rough Ashlar and the perfect Ashlar during the first degree, right? Yeah, first degree, and you are given the gavel to divest yourself, your hearts and minds, of the vices and superfluities and all that sort of good stuff, and therefore helping to transform yourself from this rough Ashlar to the perfect Ashlar. But the stones, at least in our lot, in the lodges I've been to, are like I said earlier, the one in Robert Burns' lodge, it literally was polished to a high shine, like you could see your face in it. How are you going to do that with a hammer? Even in some jurisdictions, I guess some jurisdictions have a chisel. So even if you have a hammer and a chisel, you're not getting that stone out of this process. You might get closer, I suppose, but that ain't going to happen. Go ahead.
Well, and it kind of talking to what Jarrod was talking about earlier, the idea of what was used before. Again, according to Mackey's, they talked about that what we consider the perfect Ashlar versus the rough Ashlar is different than what was then in the past. They call it the Perpend Ashlar was what we would consider the perfect Ashlar, because it was polished on the ends so it could be on the surface of a wall. But the rough Ashlar was not formless mass of rock. It was a stone ready to use, no surface of which would appear in the building walls. It was unfinished in the sense of unpolished. So our rough Ashlars in our lodges, at least in mine, probably wouldn't be considered the rough Ashlar from the origin. It's a little too rough because that wouldn't be able to be used. But what I found was even more interesting was the next sentence that is it in other records of which only a few have been found. A Perpend Ashlar was of stone cut with a key in it, so it's to interlock with a second stone correspondingly. Kind of like what Jarrod was talking about with the archway, that the keystone. Again, this is York Rite stuff. The little bit I know, that was one of the elements to become a master. You had to be able to carve the keystone and to be able to have the interlocking stone. But what I wrote down was the 5 points of fellowship. Could that be an interpretation of an interlocking stone? The two Ashlars joining together in a unique format in a corresponding format? The inquisitive looks on the faces that people can't see on Spotify.
The 5 points of fellowship, as they're used in our ritual, are specific to the passing of a word. So I'm not sure about down south with you guys. So
oh yeah, it's the same. I just when I read that it was a stone cut out of key, so as the interlock with a second stone. I thought, where do we have that in our degree other than York Rite? But York Rite, it's like Scottish Rite and everything else, has come out of Masonry. It's not York Rite necessarily wasn't first, was it?
No. Well, okay. The Royal Arch, if I remember correctly, there's a debate as to whether or not the Royal Arch was part of the Master Mason degree, and as to whether or not it was a piece of the Master Mason degree or if it was actual ritual in the Master Mason degree. So that does come out of Freemasonry. As to the rest of York Rite, I don't know exactly where the history of its ritual.
You mean the 3 degrees of Masonry, the Entered Apprentice, Fellowcraft, Master Mason, and the York Rite? Or was it? Isn't that?
Well, because originally there were only 2 degrees.
Exactly. I was just going to say that. Yeah.
And so, I mean, but yes,
the Master Mason's degree is a what's the word?
Innovation.
Thank you.
Well,
innovation in masonry.
There's debate as to whether or not the Master Mason degree as we know it today is actually just they took part of what we would consider the second degree and split it off. Because originally in Masonic lodges, you had apprentices, you had fellowcrafts, and then you had the master of the lodge. So which is why, and then and in order to be a master of the lodge, you had to know all the ritual and tools and stuff. And I'm trying to remember correctly. And I think that's where the Royal Arch comes into, as it used to be part of becoming master of your lodge. But
isn't that where the past master's degree comes from? We call it Secrets of the Chair. I don't know. Don't you have something up there that's automatic after the
you
master's
automatically
degree?
become the immediate past masters. But we have the board of installed masters for a new master. So if you've never sat in the East before, there's we convene a board of installed masters.
Yeah,
same down there.
Well, we call it the past master's degree, Secrets of the Chair.
Yeah,
we just had it last week.
Yeah. So yeah, same stuff.
Probably not, but I mean, it would be really fascinating to see how yours operates because it's probably way cooler than ours.
Of course it is. It's ours.
I mean, the local guy that does ours it's a lot to memorize, and he knows it all. He's got one of those memories, but he's been doing it for 30 years or something, just crazy long time. It's fun. It's just a fun night of fellowship. It's really not too serious.
Oh, it's not done as it's not done as part of your installation?
Oh no.
Oh, ours is done as part of our installation. Like anyone who's not a past master gets kicked out of the lodge if we do this.
So are your installation? Now we're way off topic. Sorry, Matt.
Yeah.
Are your installations all closed ceremony?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
See, we have open installations.
Oh,
sorry.
God.
I didn't mean to hit that button, Jarrod. Sorry.
Yeah, they talked about it up here, but yeah, it ain't happening. They almost came out with a version of it to deal with COVID, but they didn't allow it in the end.
Interesting.
Well,
so dare I steer us back?
I mean,
getting back on topic. This is part of the topic is we're smoothing off our lack of knowledge of things to make ourselves better Freemasons. So we shouldn't feel bad because we don't know what we don't know. We should feel good that we are inquiring about the stuff we don't know.
There you go.
A little bit of a dose of self-loathing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
getting back on the topic, right? The paper that we were supposed to, discuss. The on the last page where we go is the only point in time that matters to any of us is right now, this very moment, this very breath. I don't know. To me, there's not just that only point in time matters. There's so many more points in time that matter than just right now. I think about the future a lot, and I because I'm second time married, I think about the things that I'm saying a lot before I say them. So it's not a matter of this moment in time. It's a matter of what's coming, right? And it's all important. So I don't know. I questioned a lot of this guy's statements.
I agree and I disagree, but I think that is going to be a big topic for us to discuss, and we're running short on this episode. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to pick it up there at our next episode. So please, all of you, on behalf of Jarrod and Steve and David and myself, thank you all for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again on next week's Working Tools podcast, where we'll have part 2 of our discussion of this article. Thank you and goodbye.